The last week or so, I've been very much contemplating the good fortune that I had in this life of meeting my core teacher, Ajahn Chah. And yesterday, Thanissara and I hosted a Vesak session, Vesaka Puja session, with bringing in the honouring also of Ajahn Chah. And Thanissara shared some reflections around his meeting and teaching of Ajahn Chah. So I'm going to continue a little bit around that theme because I feel that there was something in the transmission of this extraordinary teacher who basically came from a very simple farming community in the northeast of Thailand and wasn't highly educated, wasn't sophisticated in the ways of the world, that from in the same way as if he'd come from a different class or context or educational process. So a lot of his reflections and his approach to the Dharma really arose from the context he was in, which was a very deep connection to the natural rhythms of nature and to observing and living within the forests, and particularly in the era that he trained in and was able to be in, which enabled him in the first part of his life to wander the forests of what were then forests, much of which so tragically have been cut down now, but through the northeast of Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, so on. So, and he had this very earthy approach. And in fact, one day, and he was also, some of his humor was, maybe some people might think it's a bit coarse, but let's just say he was very direct, didn't beat about the bush. So one day, for example, when he was very early on, his first visit back in the day of 1977, which is when I first met him in the UK, which is where I was brought up. So he was in London at that time, and the English Sangha Trust, which was established in 1956 for the purposes of bringing monastics to England and establishing Buddhism in the UK, beyond scholasticism and the sort of colonial era of engagement with Asian Buddhism, to actually bring living Buddhist masters and teachers and a Sangha, monastic Sangha. So that hence Ajahn Chah was invited. And so they had at that time a house in Hampstead Heath, and which was a very populated part of the city. And the house, it was a summer's day, and then, so the house was very hot, and so the windows were open, and across the street, this is just an example of how he would teach and turn everything back to the mind, and then how he would interact with people around his sort of more simpler, coarser approach, or direct approach, I would think, for me more. But on one occasion, when the windows were open and people had gathered to hear this master, with great respect and interest, and really want to hear his Dhamma. And across the road there was a pub, and because it was also hot their side, they also had their windows open, but they had a rock concert going on that night, so no one could really hear anything. And Ajahn Chah just sat there smiling. He wasn't fazed. That was one of the qualities that I felt, that he wasn't fazed by what was going on around him. Everything was usable. So after a while he just said, well, is that noise disturbing you, or are you going out to disturb the noise? So what he was really pointing to wasn't so much that, yes, sometimes we do change the conditions, maybe close the window, maybe ask people to not make such a noise, whatever we do, but there's a sort of endlessness awareness to that. But what he was also really pointing to is, where are you moving from? Where's the suffering? What are you doing with this circumstance, first of all, before you engage it? So what was your reaction? What was your idea of what should happen as opposed to what was actually happening? And then the difference between that is often where we experience this self-created struggle with what's actually is and what we want. And there's so much of that goes on in our daily life. So he was always pointing to that, and also in that pointing, making the Dharma very simple and very accessible. What's happening in the mind now? Where is the dukkha? What are you doing about it? And where are you generating it from? So one day there was this lady also at Hampstead Heath, Vihara, who came and had been studying the Abhidharma, and very, very sort of, very philosophical approach to the Dhamma, very intellectual approach. And she asked this very, very complex question, philosophically complex, which is also a part of the Dharma. It's not that there's anything wrong in exploring great complexities around vast subjects. But Ajahn Chah felt that she was missing the point. So after this question, he just said, well, madam, you are like someone that keeps chickens, but in the morning you're picking up the chicken shit instead of the eggs. You're picking up the wrong thing, So it wasn't necessarily a statement for all time and all place, but he was responding to that circumstance. And that sometimes happens with teachers and masters of that caliber, that people like forever record that's a fixed position, but they're very fluid in responding. So he was saying, have you freed your own heart? Is all of this philosophy really freeing, going to the main point, So he had this way of always turning back as a first port of call. And it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't engage the conditionality of the world and try and uplift the world in so many ways, and there's so much that needs to be engaged with at these times. But it was very much about where you're doing it from, and what are you generating from your process and projections of the mind to generate more suffering into the circumstance. So I always found that this approach to the teaching, what we might call right view, the first factor of the path, to see clearly, is really important, because then you know where to hone into in the practice, to see what is here first, and then begin to contemplate from there and work from there. It's this transmission of the first factor of right view, or to see through wisdom. And why this was a very revelatory teaching for me, an approach, and one I was sort of inwardly feeling, but I just didn't have the context and the words to place it before I met Ajahn Chah and his transmission. And a lot of what I received was almost more intuitive at first than actually the frames that he was using as a teaching structure, although he was just using life a lot, but there was a sort of some structures, like the Four Noble Truths was one of his primary frames, that I had been in a system, a meditation system, that really had this idea that if you just keep working with the conditionality internally of your experience with a method, then you'll get more and more and more and more like peaceful and awakened. It's a question of honing in on the concentration, honing in on the purification, and that's not without merit, but I was really missing a huge piece, which made it very unintegrated, made my practice very unintegrated into the rest of life, and no capacity really to engage what needed to be engaged from a place of more clear seeing in the world around me. So when I really started to get where he was pointing to, like we would say, when you can't go up and you can't go down, and you can't shift, then actually around a circumstance, like you're pinned really, then the deeper level of practice emerges. And this is what life will do to us at some point. There will be some circumstance, whether it's illness, whether it's aging, whether it's death, whether it's a conflict that we're trying to avoid, and yet there it is, it won't go, complex relational field, a circumstance, just in our personal sphere, a patterning that we have that brings up very difficult mind states. There's a lot of us, first of all, moving around that situation, often avoiding, bargaining, negotiating, disassociating. And so Ajahn Chah encouragement was like, just use the presence and samadhi you have. It doesn't have to be extremely refined. It can be as much as you need to read a book to be able to contact how it is, first of all, and be willing to contemplate dukkha. Be willing to contemplate, not to dwell in dukkha, not to get lost, but to come to the end of dukkha. So this is such a sort of ABC teaching, but actually, and it's so easy to, because of that, we've heard it many times, but it's also such a central and profound doorway to the timeless Dhamma, to the timeless heart, to the non-suffering. And so in a way it's like breaking the spell of denial that dukkha isn't therefore a problem that sometimes we have to rush to get rid of or solve, but it is an invitation to deepen into a deeper level of realization about reality and a more deathless, timeless heart, where we're not in a state of suffering, but we don't know that yet because we're so busy sort of moving things around in the world to try and get the exact right circumstance. So, like for example, when one of the times when Thanissara met Master Xunhua, the great Chinese master through whom we learned the Guanyin Dharmas, still learning, I won't say learnt, very babies learning. And he was part of a delegation from our monastery to go and meet the master at the airport. And when the master arrived, he was so struck and a little bit like struck, speechless. Suddenly he was in front of the master and he didn't know what to say. So he said to Master Hua, "Do you like it here?" And and he couldn't believe, I can't believe I just asked such a dumb question. But anyway, he did it. He said, do you like it here? Do you like it here? And the master just stepped off the plane and he said, "I like it everywhere." Everywhere is a home for me. This is the heart of the free heart at every circumstance, every time, every place. And it's not to say that these great teachers didn't have very difficult circumstances, like the master had to flee from China when communism swept through, flee for his life, and then immigrate eventually into San Francisco, and wasn't well received in that era. A lot of racism, no one recognized what a great master he was. So, there's not that there were massive challenges, but the heart had a free space that it could meet those challenges and engage then from the optimum place. So I think the challenge for our time is to translate this profound teaching of the arising of dukkha, the contemplation of what is generating, like as Ajahn Chah would say, very simply, as you bring everything simply, it's the wanting and not wanting of the mind. I don't want this and I want something else. That's constantly happening. What is the freedom from that? It's the release out of that dynamic, the push and pull, into allowing ourselves to soften within how it is, and then pick up the path, which includes right action, right speech. So it's not just, just accepting everything. No, it's not just letting go. It's also wise picking up this balance, but from a very different place once we've arrived into a wiser, freer heart. So I think the challenge for us in the Dharma is to apply this same principle not only inwardly, but to the system that we're living within. As bell hooks would say, the system that has been shaped by these very that we've been conditioned in these very profound ways of viewing the world. For example, we could call that modernity, as a book that's just come out called Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, which is really worth reading, and is systems thinker and indigenous from an indigenous point of view and from an academic point of view. So an interesting mix, profound mix, wise engagement. What bell hooks call the system that's shaped by patriarchy, white supremacy, imperialism, and predator capitalism, and just to embroider onto that, extreme growth, extreme extraction that is actually driving the destruction of this sacred web of life. So the call for us is it's the same practice. Where is the dukkha? Where is the denial? And how do we break that spell and really meet what's happening? So Vanessa de Oliveira says in her book, Hospicing Modernity, she looks at the four different spheres of denial at our system, the system that is shaping so much of our internal worldview. Looking at the denial of the systemic, historical, and ongoing violence and complicity and harm that the system is built upon. I'm just actually paraphrasing because we have a bit of a short time here together. That's the first area. The second area, the denial of the limits of the planet and the unsustainability of modernity, or the colonizing mindset, if you like. That we would need 6 or 7 planets to continue in the way that we are. The denial of entanglement, which means seeing the insistence on seeing ourselves just as an individual or just our particular tribe, rather than understanding, as Thich Nhat Hanh, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh would say, the deep interbeing nature of our reality and of our existence. And the denial of the magnitude and complexities of the problems that we need to face together, as opposed to just going to some more simplistic techno fix, the faith in that technology. That's not unheard, but the high priests of our culture. Let's just throw AI in there now and let that fix it. I don't think so. Where's the wisdom? So to have that lens, not only to look in, but I think one of the difficulties in the Dharma practice is that we tend to have this very highly developed lens that looks internally into our processes and maybe into our immediate relational field and the needs of that relational field, but we yet have to really have a language and way of looking, and we probably have to draw from other languaging and adapt that to look at the whole system, and to actually have to really understand that this system and the ways that it's at odds in many times, in many moments in our daily life with our actually innate value system, how this system is actually killing us all and all life forms, to put it very, as Ajahn Chah would probably very bluntly. So, to understand, how do we shift out, how do we at least we start with naming, the power of naming. So one of the things, as many of you know, I am very involved in this process of translating Dharma for this time. And it is about breaking the spell in many ways, of what keeps us in ways of collusion, in the same way as that we have our own internal collusions with kind of quite immature ideas, like just reading an article by a tech guy, one of the founders of that whole world that's emerged from the beginning. Sorry, I can't remember their name. Talking about where are the billionaires at? What are they? They're kind of, and the people really caught in the system that have a lot of power. They're really about escaping, like going into space, going to Mars, going to a bunker, living in a metaverse, you know. It's all quite childish in a way. It's all sort of immature. So it's all part of the denial. And sort of that gets really magnified. So one of the things that in breaking the spell is using the power of language. So saying we're not in climate change, we're in an extinction cycle. You know, so we're not eternal beings. We will have to meet death. You know, so it's in the Buddhist Dharma, Buddha Dharma, to wake us up and mature us out of our naivety and narcissism. Is, you know, the frequent contemplation, the monastic training every day. I am of the nature to age, I am of the nature, this body is the nature to sicken, and everything that I think I am is of the nature to die. So to actually put that lens into the larger world, so that we learn to live at the edge of realism rather than in the rabbit holes of avoidance, which is understandable, but not really what this practice, as I understood it from Ajahn Chah, is calling us to do. So we're in a very, very dangerous moment that's full of dangers, but full of potentials actually as well. There's Edward Edinger, who wrote The Creation of Consciousness. He's a Jungian. He said, the breakdown of a central myth, the myth of our civilization, if you like, just take one of those denials, the myth of endless growth, which is what the breakdown of a central myth is like shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. The fluid is spilt and drains away, and meaning is lost. In its place, primitive contents are reactivated, or the unconscious, unprocessed. And we've seen that, just no filtering, just greed, hatred, and delusion everywhere. In its place, the unconscious, unprocessed contents are reactivated, differentiated values disappear and are replaced by the elemental motivations of power and pleasure, or else the individual is exposed to emptiness and despair. So this is the moment we're in. We're in the moment when, whether we like it or not, the myth of our civilization is shattering and needs to shatter because it's unrealistic. But it's a dangerous moment because it can shatter into chaos and breakdown, and possibly will actually, in ways that are very, just the least optimum way. So to manage to have a breakdown that is, in some ways, our teacher in the monastery said, Dharma practice is like a managed breakdown. That you're allowing what you thought you were and all the things we've shaped by, you're allowing them to dissolve. And in its place, what's going to take its place? That's the thing. Where do we find refuge? And this is really important question for us. And to make it, as Ajahn Chah would say, this practice is preparation for when big things hit. We do this every day. Where's my refuge? So to really, we need to find this heart, this deathless heart. It's here, always calling, always present. Ajahn Chah would call the living dharma, guiding. Need to find our humanity. How do we stay humane, empathetic? How do we actually ramp up the parameters of generosity, patience, truth, loving kindness, equanimity, and determination and renunciation? How do we actually, the need for this to be centralized, for us to manage and navigate well what we're actually all now have been kind of, we're here now, this is it, this is our part of our curriculum. And to be able to do that, to remember that the practice in some ways doesn't necessarily change on an inner level. What we do may change dramatically, but this ability to bring back, as Ajahn Chah would always point, what are you doing with this moment? Where is the mind? How do you know, put the mind, know where to put the mind in an emergency, in a difficult situation. And it's like, take a breath, go to a different part of your being, because the mind will freak out, the mind will just, where is the stability? So these are the inquiry questions, the womb of awareness, if you like, Yoniso Manasikara. It's another way of talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a very inadequate translation. It's not going to the cognitive so much. We're going to the deep, aware, present, timeless heart. Embodied. So we train the attention. I've been working with training and forgetting all the time, because the habit is so strong to lean into my thought forms to describe everything. And I've been training attention to go to the embodied, direct experience of the heart center embodied with the breath as a different orientation of relationship with myself, with it all, and just listening there. And it's more simple, it's more formless, it's less activated. I mean, there might be emotional and a lot of felt sense activation, but there's also something very steady in the listening and the quality of presence that's just willing to meet this moment. And that's one of the learnings I feel that was a gift for me through my monastic life. I was a very slow learner in many ways. I mean, I learned things quite quickly, but the actual integration and application of it, that I say I'm pretty slow on. So then I've suffered a lot. But one of the really helpful learnings for me in the monastery was really around this simplicity of just being willing to dwell in the non-abiding in the complexity of the mind, non-abiding, abiding in the. And there was a lot of encouragement for that. You didn't have to show up as a personality with an idea, a solution. So this willingness of Ajahn Chah to be simple, to breathe, to feel, to wait, until the response comes from a different place. And maybe that response has a more quantum-like feeling. It can really shift set in a way that the cognitive mind can't so much, because it's very beholden to time and a sense of presence into the future. Doesn't have a tendency for a whole global gestalt of this moment, which the heart does, because the heart is actually, all things are resident in this heart, in this awareness. There's nothing outside of this awareness. There's no boundaries. No separative places, ultimately, in reality. So we're in this very extraordinary moment, and while it can be overwhelming, the practice is to be willing. It's the other great learning of the monastery, being willing to just meet how it is. And in that, there's a lot of relief, actually. That's what I noticed in my monastic training, is the avoidance of dukkha is more dukkha than actually just going, this is dukkha. And just like going, it is dukkha, it's a First Noble Truth. Just don't try and escape it. Just breathe there. You don't have to suffer from it. You're just noticing, this is dukkha. Rather than, I'm a mess, I'm all over the place. Which is often what I think also. And they're like, this is dukkha. This is dukkha. So the hopeful piece, to sum it up with yeah, I love Eckhart Tolle, many of his ways of looking. When we move into this heart, into this citta, into this knowing presence, the Yoniso Manasikara, the womb of awareness, present, we find this articulated so well in this quote from Eckhart Tolle. Ultimately, we're not a person, but a focal point of consciousness where the universe is becoming aware of itself. Ultimately, we're not a person, but a focal point of consciousness where the universe is becoming aware of itself, through which the universe is becoming conscious of itself. We're awakening. This is awakening. We're not just awakening ourselves, everything is awakening. The shadows are there to be awakened to be illuminated, to be seen, to be dissolved, to be transformed. So we have a lot of work to do. And that work is always happening here, now. And inviting us to just bring these moments, as we bring the primary task, bringing these moments of knowing, reflective, investigative inquiry. Where is the suffering? Where is the ending of suffering? And offering that as our gift to the world. Okay, well, there's lots more to say about this. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your presence, for your time, for your attention. And for anyone who would like to stay on for 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, happy to have any dialogue, anything you want to share, anything you want to ask about. Otherwise, we just complete here with a sharing of blessings for those leaving. Just take a breath before you go. And share blessings with me for the welfare of all at this time, calling on all the great realized ones to stay close to this realm. Extending love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so, right, let me just come out of, let me see you all. Kate, hi, greetings, nice to see you. Don't forget, are you unmuted or is there something that I need to do? Hang on a sec, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, you seem unmuted. Quite sure. Hang on a sec, it might be that I haven't got... Try again now. Oh, I can't hear you, that's a shame. I think it might... Let me just see if it's my side. 1 second. Yeah, I can unmute. 1 second, looking in here, audio. Yeah. Sorry, Kate, I couldn't hear you. I don't know if someone else wants to try. You can use chat as well. Yeah, to speak in case it's your side. It might be my side. Kathy?
Me, I'm speaking.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Then at least it works for some.
Yeah. Sorry, Kate, I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, how are you doing? What's happening?
Very powerful talk this morning. I appreciated it and agree with what you're saying. I'm in a place where I'm learning more about Buddhism and about meditation and so forth to help my own resilience, my personal life. I've suffered a lot of recent losses of loved ones and so forth, and it's helping me greatly. But I haven't figured out, now that I'm feeling a little bit more resilient, haven't figured out how not to be overwhelmed when I try to take it to offer something beyond myself to deal with all this immense crisis uh, around us that starts with many of my friends who are just overwhelmed, and my granddaughter who's overwhelmed, and I don't know what the next step is in trying to be of some help beyond myself. So I'm
Yes. Yeah, I really hear you. I think you, I think you're definitely not alone. I feel that. I think we all feel what you're saying. It's just way too much for any of us to manage. That's the thing. We've never, this is mapless territory. We've not been in this moment in our living human memory. And we haven't been here very long in terms of the planet, but so it's undigestible. I think there's a couple of things to this. I think in the practice, the training of the practice is just to try and, you know what, when we go into the mind, we go into the whole 10,000 things and then we're lost, you know. But just to try and train the attention to stay with what's present now in the body, like this feeling, and it's learning to tolerate very uncomfortable feeling because it's activating a lot of, you know, fear, panic, overwhelm, because we have earth bodies as well, so there's also a lot being felt, and there's also just this massive psychotic disassociation in the collective. So those of us that are feeling will be feeling more of what's actually happening, because a lot of people are not wanting to go there. I don't blame them, but so to try and actually see it's not always personal to what is felt, what is it, and so to steady, you know, this training, like the Buddha said, for samadhi, you have to learn to withstand unpleasant feeling. So to be able to just go, this feeling, and this is where the cognitive can help. In this moment, this is unpleasant feeling. And just to feel the feeling in the feeling, to breathe there. And you're allowing that to metabolize. You're training your system to metabolize more intensity, because what we're talking about is an increase of intensity, which is what we're all experiencing. And you know, in a way, the body and your system can metabolize. So that's to some degree. The other thing is we can't do this alone. We do need, like I just did a 10-session kind of training or series called Mindfulness in the Apocalypse. And a lot of what I realized in that was really what's more important is less about what are we all going to do, although the focus was we're going to do something. It's more about having the space for people to talk about what they're going through, and then finding in that space, once we name what was interesting for me, it's a bit like therapy sometimes. Once you name the bad story, you can start to actually engage the health in your system, the health in the system, the health, this human spirit, which is indomitable. And so you see in the process of going through like how awful it is and how difficult and how overwhelming, eventually started to happen in quite a quick space of time, was like people's passion and in creativity and arising without necessarily saying, well, this is the solution, let's all do this. And so, you know, so I think it's that process of finding collective spaces to have conversation and for us to open those conversations. And so I think people are waking up and wanting these conversations. You just find a way in to open the door. Not everyone, but it's finding people that are, and then having community. So I'm very interested in developing that. Sorry, that was a rather long answer. It was a pretty universal question that you're asking that we're all struggling with.
Let us know what sort of groups you're.
Oh yeah, no, it's already going. I definitely we are forming that. We last year founded People's Alliance for Earth Action Now, and we have weekly meetings. And I can definitely ask Beth to send you the details so you can join in. I'm just trying to find a different time for the meeting so that the people overseas can join in too, not just in the evening time in the US. So.
Plans for Earth Action Now?
Yeah, peon, like a peon of voices. This is my image, a peon of joyful voices. Then I like that word, and I have to find something to fit the acronym. So it's People's Alliance for Earth Action Now. It's peon, P-A. The website is actually PAEAN.earth, and that I think it's either .com or .org, or you might just find it through that actually. Suzanne, greetings.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Thanissara?
Yes, I can. Yeah,
Thank you.
You're good. Yeah.
So it's coming through. Thank you so much for the powerful Dharma talk. Thanissara, you mentioned in the context of your talk that you go to the heart and then you kind of stay there for a moment or two. I wonder if you could just go over that for another go around right now. Do you know what I'm referencing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you mind, Thanissara, doing it a little go around again? Because I just feel like it's kind of key to this whole something about the living in the heart is where it's kind of at, but then you kind of embellished it. And I wondered if you could do it just a little bit again now. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It's a training. It's a training of attention, right? So where does attention usually go? Well, I notice it usually always goes to my thought forms, and I let my thought forms describe myself, the world, so, and that's fine. I'm actually generally speaking quite happy with my thought forms. They seem to be pretty on tune, but they also, I'm also aware there's a deeper or more embodied knowing. So I realize I can, and it's simpler than going to the thought form. So I think the key is that the heart, when we say the heart, sounds so abstract. We're actually talking about a physical heart energetic center that's embodied. And that can be the whole front of the body. I mean, you would say it's all connected, but it's actually, I do bring the attention to the location around this area. And it might shift down towards the belly area, because that also feels like part of the knowing, the felt sense. If you've ever come across Eugene Gendlin's work, the felt sense somatic knowing is this front of the body from the whole. So
okay, this is helpful, Thanissara. This is very helpful.
Yeah, so it's and using the breath. So I use moderating the breath a lot. And we did it at the beginning. We used 5 breaths. I actually also do a breath practice that deepens, and sometimes listen to music that I like, that's sort of really supportive, like laying down and then taking slow, deep breaths into the body. And then breathing out, just to help regulate them, because the nervous system is, as I said, it's just dealing with so much intensity. So I think because it's not taught in the Dharma so much, because people have the, I just watch the natural breath. Well, maybe at the time of the Buddha, the natural breath was probably less short. We have a lot of holding from the systems we've been in, where the patterning is very disassociative. We're patterned to be actually disassociated from feeling. And in some cultures more than others, in white culture particularly so. So I'm not saying in other cultures not so, but just talking from this skin and noticing what I notice. So we have to, like, in a way, come when we, and sometimes the way it's taught in the Dharma, it's almost like this aggressive command, come to the body, it's almost like it's so yang, it's so unloving. So like in the Karuna work, which some of you are familiar with a little bit, maybe, which was a psychotherapeutic training that I was involved with in the UK, we had a question of how is it now, or what's present now? So this is more of an invitation into a deeper embodied presence, what's present now. And especially when there's a difficult feeling, which often there is. I mean, I wake up with really difficult feeling tones. I mean, honest to God, if I didn't have a practice, I wouldn't get out of bed. I would just pull the duvet over and just, it's hard. I find it very hard because when I go to the mind, it's activating primary patterning, which is all about hopelessness, can't do, abandonment, it's like the whole litany. And it's so convincing, so I remember my practice and just sit there for a while, get up. And often I'll do these, lay down first actually, and do these really in the shrine room here, and just do some really deep. And then I start to feel like I'm becoming human. I'm coming out of that patterning and I'm feeling like I'm connecting, and then just sit. So it's like this gentle, you can't go in with this harshness. And unfortunately, the Dharma transmission has been quite more yang often, in not necessarily all transmissions, but it was in the one that I received, had this tendency to go in like warrior like. It was a warrior tradition. So yes, normalizing. Well, this is why we have to hear each other, so that we're real about the enormity of what's overwhelming our nervous systems and that we're finding difficult to regulate. And so being able to name the terrors, how they're felt, helps to dissolve some of the power of it, So it takes time to, in a way, it's like reclaiming the human in me. And that's sort of feeling a little bit okay. I don't really necessarily go for a high state of bliss. I'm just like, okay is good enough to start with. And just sort of breathing and then training the attention to again and again when I'm in the thought forms that are more to do with anxiety, despair, overwhelm, those sorts of spaces. Just taking that breath, feeling the body, and just being willing to feel deeper into the body, feeling the heart, feeling into the solar plexus and down towards the belly. And that's very simple. And remembering in this practice, we're just really being with a breath at a time. So I remind myself, all I need to do is show up and breathe. Well, I'm breathing anyway, but to really make the breath. And for some people, breath is difficult. As I said, we're dissociated out of it. So the deliberate deepening of breath. So you just find a place in the body that isn't activating. I'm just like feeling my hands holding together, or my hands, there's, the self-compassion practices that people have been doing. So just it's about making a habit of whatever you find is grounding, connecting, simplifying. It's just making it simple and making it a habit.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your wisdom. And I think you're really a profound role model, Thanissara. You know,
In some moments.
so thank you for taking that on. And I think your courage really helps me to take it on as much as I'm able.
Well, I
So
think that's
thank you.
the other thing is
Thank you.
also to realize, like an army, when you have to come off the front lines.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we just can't, and we have to look. You know, we have to maybe take our attention to something that isn't full on the edge. You know, of the moment we're in. You know, so that it's more like a conscious, okay, I'm just going to go for a walk or chat with a friend or watch a movie, whatever it is, you know,
Yeah.
find, you know, just to give some, it's not that you're not aware, but it's just like you can't live there on the front lines all the time, you know, so to know when to retreat, when to keep it simple, when to this beautiful, like here I'm just surrounded by a lot of beautiful nature and going into nature, these things, finding resourcing things to do. That, you know, like even for me, like lighting a candle, lighting some incense, sitting by the shrine, or picking up an inspirational, you know, like what is supportive. I mean, I actually find with people reading or writing about what's actually happening supportive, actually, ironically, the more people I'm hearing mirroring what's happening, the more it helps regulate all of us, that we're not, you know, it's like, thank you for naming this, thank you for but also it's helpful for people doing that to also, we're not necessarily looking for a Pollyannish kind of outcome, but that can hone and encourage the human spirit and the wholeness that we are. Again, like in a therapeutic process, you're trying to, for yourself and for the client, trying to tap into the innate health and allow that to bring forth, you know, what's needed. And that can be very surprising and dynamic, you know. But yeah, it's you know, and also, you know, my early patterning was very unboundaried for various reasons. So, and many people's are, they and I don't want to go into too much like genderizing, but you know, it can be those that are more feminine or women or who identify in that way, that aren't trained so much. I mean, in you know, on the masculine edge of things, you know, or in the conditioning, let's say, in that way, whatever we identify internally, the conditioning is often to defend against feeling. So there's more armoring. So that work may be a little bit different, like to softening and opening. If one has been feminized in the less helpful sense of the conditioned sense of the idea of what that is, it's more to be a receptacle, to be an enabler, to be a sort of a manager of everyone else's feelings. You know, you're acting as the sort of as the, you know, as the one that's regulating the system of the family or whatever, or the community. And one's very honed to that. But what it does mean is that one's often flooded with what's not yours. And so if that's the end, if we're at that end of the spectrum, then we're going to have to learn to hold boundaries, to say no, to not have to take everything on, to know that's your stuff, you know, to know when we need to not engage in the litany of disasters for a day or two, you know. You know, I find things like the water elements being very helpful for that. Prayer is very helpful for that. To reestablish your centrality, your truth, your power. So these things we have to know a little bit. What edge are we weak on, and where can we balance?
Thank you so much, Thanissara. 1 million bows.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I think, you know, as I said, I think all of the transmission of the Dharma that's come through centuries, all the practitioners, and the spirit of Ajahn Chah. The spirit of Ajahn Chah, his spirit was very like adaptable. there was a lot of permission to adapt to time and place in terms of without compromising the depth of the Dharma and the ethics of the Dharma. Like even in the West, he said, oh, if you need to call it Christianity, then do. I mean, I don't think that would have been that helpful to do that at that time. But what he was saying is that we're in a very different time and place than the Buddha was, so we have to have a Dharma that's fluid and can meet a vastly, massively complex changing landscape. We have to try and, like a kung fu almost, like where do we land in our integrity, and then how do we, how do we respond? And in a way, at a certain point, the Dharma's responding through us. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what was happening with Ajahn Chah. He was the Dharma, really.
And I think, Thanissara, I think that you kind of you medium his spirit. You know how a medium does what she does. I think that some of that goes on, that his spirit becomes more language because of you and Thanissara having studied with him. And thank God that he's here with us now.
Yeah, I do feel if we touch into that Dharma, we're touching into all the masters, into the living Dharma, and they're all here, they're here. They're definitely here. We're in a cosmology of presences that are close. I think everyone's like lining up for this battle that we're in. The unseen forces are also players, and the ancestry is also players, and the masters are also present for sure. And I feel Ajahn Chah was a bodhisattva. So, and I do feel very grateful to have seen that spirit in him before I even understood what he was saying. I recognize it. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Lovelies, my dears, I guess I better push on. So lovely to meet with you. Thank you for being present and for your practice. And let's just keep going in the way of the Dhamma. And as we practice the Dhamma will rise up to support us. For sure, that's true. Okay, take care, everyone.